What's up, y'all? This is Revolutionary Fitness Radio, episode 35.
The revolution will not be televised. The revolution is here.
Welcome to another episode of Revolutionary Fitness Radio. I'm your host, Sean Garcia, and this is the podcast dedicated to bringing health, fitness, and wellness to the people. Our goal, empower you all to understand your body, treat it well, and give you the tools to become an agent of change in your community through helping others. Let's move together.
The perseverance of a rebel, I drop heavier levels, it's unseen or heard. A king with words, can't knock the hustle, but I've seen street dreams deferred. Dark spots in my mind where the scene occurred. Some say I'm too deep, I'm in too deep to sleep. Through me, Muhammad will forever speak Greek. Brothers with handshakes on ghetto landscapes, where a man is determined by how much a man make. Pop cognacs and spit old raps with young cats with cigarettes in their ear. Niggerish they appear under the FUBU is a guru, that's untapped. Wanna be in the rat race but ain't ran one lap. Ran so far from the streets that you can't come back. You tripping with nowhere to unpack.
On today's show, we have guest Jackie Mautner. Jackie is an amateur bike polo athlete here in New York City. She's also an organizer with the group called W.O.R.D, which stands for Women Organized to Resist and Defend. So we're going to talk about bike polo, exactly what that sport is, what are the intricacies of that sport, because many people probably haven't heard of bike polo before. And we're also going to be talking about transgender rights within sports and athletics, and get Jackie's take on how everyone can be a participant in trying to make sports, athletics, and physical culture more accessible to everybody. Hope you enjoyed the show. This episode is brought to you by Manduka. Manduka provides the best yoga mats, yoga products, and yoga gear, all eco-conscious and high quality. Founded on the simple idea that a better yoga mat can make a world of difference, Manduka is the leader in yoga mats, towels, yoga props, and yoga mat carriers. RevFit loves Manduka products, and you can find out our favorites on our site by going to revolutionaryfitness.org/Manduka. That's MANDUKA.
Hold it now. Oh!
All right, so we're here with Jackie. How you doing, Jackie?
Good.
Thanks for coming on the show. So we just want to jump into it and get some background on you. So can you talk about, who you are, how you got into, athletics and bike polo specifically, and kind of what's been your experience of being a bike polo athlete?
Yeah, sure. So I didn't do too many competitive sports growing up. I did a few in high school, but really my passions at the time were surfing and skating and snowboarding. So nothing where you're really competing on a team or team sports or of that nature. So I moved to the city and started to get into cycling as a way of commuting. And eventually I was passing by the court where they played bike polo, and I thought, this is really interesting. So I went and watched a few times and then was asked to try it out. And so I jumped in there, did horribly, got heckled, but I stuck with it, and I've been playing now for about, I think, 5 years or so. I played both in New York and in Philadelphia when I was living there. It's a pretty small community, but it's worldwide, so you can travel to almost any major city and know that they're playing bike polo there. I've played in San Juan, I've played in Toronto, I've played all across the U.S.
So for those who are listening who probably have never, people could probably imagine what bike polo is. But can you break down exactly what bike polo is and kind of what the nature of the sport is?
Yeah, sure. So it's a game that's played on bikes, obviously, and it's similar to polo, but maybe more similar to hockey in that it's a full contact sport. So you can check people off their bikes. That's legal. And it's a 3-on-3 game, and it starts by having the ball in the center and two people jousting, which is just going to control the ball first. And it usually goes about 15 minutes or first to 5 goals. And Yeah, it's a fun game to play. It's a fun game to watch. It's pretty fast paced, and yeah, it's a really supportive community as well, which is important for me as someone who's trans. There are very few trans athletes in general, and then there's me and maybe one other person, maybe a couple other people that I don't know about, but one other person just came out recently. We did an interview for a Polo blog together, so we were talking a lot about the issues that we face, or that, where people have been super supportive. For example, I played in an all-women's tournament up in Toronto, and I had a little bit of anxiety about it, but everything turned out great. Everyone was really welcoming and supportive. So I guess it might be the nature of the sport being so small and in its infant stages, just relative to other sports. Its recent reincarnation has been maybe since the late 90s, I think, picked up. So,
yeah, I was gonna ask why you thought the community was more accepting than others. That kind of makes sense too, with it being a younger sport, a tight knit community, and
yeah.
it seems like most of the is based mostly in urban metropolises, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it was born out of sort of the bike courier or messenger culture, where they would just get together when they had downtime and just hit the ball around and have fun, and it started to get more regulated and started to spread worldwide. So
Awesome.
yeah.
So you talk about how the community is more accepting than others. Can you talk about, as a trans person, can you talk about like the stuff that you encounter in athletics and sports specifically, that might make it uncomfortable, or you feel like you're not accepted into the community?
Yeah. So I think that part of it, again, because it's in its infancy, we're sort of formulating what the ground rules are for it at this point. And this point is particular because the context of it is that, regarding trans people, is that we're getting more visibility in the media. Not much, but, there are stars like Laverne Cox of Orange is the New Black, or, there's that new show called Transparent.
Yeah.
But at the same time, because we're getting more visibility, and the issue is coming up across the country, where either schools are pushing, high schools and other colleges are pushing for inclusion, but getting pushback from conservative groups, or in professional sports even, it can be really tough because governing bodies are largely uninformed about transgender issues. So it's been a time where I think that sports that have been around for a while are grappling with this issue for the first time now. Because even though we are a small community, we're here, and for larger sports, there's bound to be people who want to still compete even after they've transitioned, or get into it after they transition. So it wasn't until 2004 that the IOC, which is the governing body for the Olympics, had a policy where they required surgery, legal recognition of your gender, and 2 years on hormone replacement therapy. So those are the ground rules that the IOC uses. And, there are other governing bodies that either just, like CrossFit, for example. CrossFit just came out and tried to bar a trans woman from competing, because they said their policy is now that, whatever gender you were assigned at birth is, biologically like the one that you have to compete with, so even if you're trans woman who's been on hormone therapy for over 2 years, where most of your characteristics and your strength and everything like that is very comparable to other women, they will still not let you compete with other women. So,
and that's interesting to me. CrossFit, I've written a lot about CrossFit because it is in itself a new sport too. It's only come out in the past, decade or so. And it's gotten a lot of praise for being, putting women and men on an equal playing field, so to speak, doing very similar movements and similar kind of competitions, but, still divided. But they have unisex teams and things like that. But they also are very bad when it comes to race. I mean, the balance and composition, is mostly white folks who are doing CrossFit. And I wonder why, a new sport like bike polo versus a new sport like CrossFit, why they would have different developments in terms of being more accepting to different folks.
Yeah, I think the other thing is that bike polo, I might not mention this, is explicitly co-ed, and I think that there's been a lot of talk about what is going to happen in the future, whether or not it's going to divide like soccer or baseball or any of these other basketball, any of these other team sports, or if it's going to remain co-ed. And I think it works well if it remains co-ed. There's still an underrepresentation of women overall in the sport, but a lot of people are working on that and trying to get more women to come out. So I think that's one factor that's also pretty crucial. The other factor is that I think that bike polo is largely driven by the community of bike polo players. There is a regulating body, but that comes up with the rule set year after year. But there's a lot of talk on forums that the regulating body is tuned into in terms of listening to people. And the people who are in the regulating body are also bike polo players themselves, like actively bike polo players. So I think that's a little bit unique because it is new. But yeah, going back to CrossFit, or I think a better example would be Fallon Fox. Fallon Fox is an MMA fighter, and she's been training for a while and just has started to do fights recently, past couple of years. But she was forced to disclose her history as having transitioned. And after disclosing her, her status as a trans woman, she caused a lot of controversy. Not, by her own doing, but people like Joe Rogan, who are, listened to a lot by various MMA fighters on this subject, was coming out in a very bigoted way against Fallon Fox competing with other women. And it has a lot to do with both fear and then ignorance, I think, as well. So the fear is that, especially in the cases of schools where people are really sensitive to locker rooms and bathrooms and all these other things, there's a lot of fear built up around trans people having bodies that are different. Of course, Fallon Fox transitioned both with gender-confirming surgeries as well as hormone replacement therapy. And so that's something that she feels gives her every right, and, rightfully so, to compete with other women. Because it lowers muscle mass, it lowers bone density, it does a lot of things to your body that puts you on an equal playing field. And there are a lot of experts who deal with transgender patients, and this is a consensus that they all have. But, people like Joe Rogan like to handpick other doctors who don't really have much information available to them to bring on their show and say a whole bunch of whack stuff.
Yeah, it's crazy too, because Joe Rogan's always trying to play the card like he is, super non-bigot. Like he always talking about how he's not a homophobe and thing. I mean, this is literally, he spends like an hour on his show talking about this stuff.
Yeah.
But especially when it comes to the sport of MMA, which he's so invested in, it manifests in reality what his stance really is. And you mentioned too that there's a lot more in the media about trans people. I mean, the show Transparent and all these things, but trans people aren't. They're not new. It's not something that just came around in recent history.
No,
what have trans people been doing in athletics for the decades prior to what we're entering now?
I think it's hit or miss. I think that a lot of trans people are pushed away from the outset because of if you want to go to the gym, if you want to go to spaces that are segregated by gender. In different areas like locker rooms, obviously, it's just discouraging to have to, show up and then be discriminated or just have different people be afraid of you and feel like you're, not who you say you are. So it's a good question. I mean, I think there have been, few examples prior to the past decade to choose from, and I can't think of any names off the top of my head, although I know that trans people have competed in as high up as the Olympics prior to that. So, it's kind of, it's the era of transgender rights right now, I think it's coming to the forefront. So hopefully this will, the changes that happen in society in general will pave the way for people feeling more comfortable to compete as the gender they identify with.
Definitely. And I can see too, I mean, this being a larger issue, especially for young athletes who, I mean, there's probably no welcoming or open spaces for a young athlete. Or very few. I mean, maybe you have some examples of cases where young athletes are getting a little bit more accessibility, but I feel like for the young athlete, this would be even more of a harder position to be in.
Yeah, there's certainly more stigma around children who are very clear about their gender identity, which may not match the gender they were assigned at birth. And so that's why it's really interesting to watch things unfold in places like Minnesota, which I think I mentioned to you previous to this, that Minnesota high schools have voted to try to make an inclusive policy for transgender students who want to compete in sports. And so it basically ensures that if you're a trans girl, for example, you have access to the girls' locker room and to bathroom that you identify, that you feel comfortable using, and to be able to play on the sports teams so that you don't get left on the sidelines. But, this backlash by conservative groups has just used fear-mongering tactics to try to scare people into reacting against it, when it's a relatively new thing for people to be thinking about. So there's been a couple of ads that have featured young women sitting on the sidelines, we suppose because she was not chosen where a transgender athlete was in her place. And So the ad reads something like, "The end of girls' sports," and then it says, "Her dreams of a scholarship shattered. Your 14-year-old daughter lost her position on an all-girls team to a male, and now she may have to shower with him." So I think that, goes down to the root of the problem, which is that trans people are, treated as being deceptive, and as if they want access to spaces because they are, perverts or for whatever reason. People are caught up on biological differences which they don't quite understand fully, and they don't understand gender identity, and they're the ones who are pushing back against this. Other people recognize, especially younger people, I think, are the most receptive to just understanding that if someone says that they are a gender that they don't appear to be, then they are, and so, schools have been a contested area for these policies to be implemented in.
So can you go into a little bit more in depth if you know? I mean, what would what the policies look like practically? What is acceptable policies that we need to be getting in our schools and in pro sports?
Well, it's a really tricky situation. I think what makes it tricky is that we don't have a healthcare system that is inclusive of trans healthcare. And trans healthcare means everything from gender reaffirming surgeries, which are a lot more than just, bottom surgery. They can range from facial surgery to all types of different things that, help trans people feel more comfortable in their bodies. So there's that. There's hormone therapy, and then there's also just therapy for all the stress of going through life as a trans person and facing all the discrimination. And so because these things are not covered by all insurance companies, they are slowly getting more coverage in different states that have required insurance companies to cover them. But because they are somewhat inaccessible in terms of their cost, it makes it really difficult to set requirements, I think, that say you have to have, for the IOC, for example, that require you to have surgery, which is, you buy a fancy car for the price of gender reassignment surgery. And legal, recognition is something that is a pain. It's not something that's impossible to do, but it's certainly prohibitive. And, most companies are now, most insurance companies are covering hormone replacement therapy, so that's a good thing. But it's because of all these restrictions that makes it an extra burden on trans athletes to meet the requirements that are set upon them. So I think that, there are ones that are reasonable. I think that Fallon Fox advocates for things like, hormone therapy, 2 years on hormone therapy being a requirement for women to compete in something like MMA. But again, surgery in particular being the most expensive of them is something that I don't believe should be necessary for trans people to compete in various sports, in any sport really.
Definitely.
It's like the question is how many sports, are played with your genitals. Right? I mean,
definitely. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we go back, we're going to keep digging into this stuff. We'll be right back.
Tú nos dices que debemos sentarnos, pero las ideas solo pueden levantarnos, caminar, correr, no rendirse ni retroceder, ver, aprender como esponja a absorbe. Nadie sobre todos, faltan todos, suman todos para todos, todo para nosotros. Soñamos en grande que se caiga el imperio. Lo gritamos algo, no queda más remedio. Esto no es utopía, es alegre rebeldía del baile de los que sobran de la danza tuya y mía. Levantarnos para decir llevar. Ni África ni América Latina se suba. Un barro con casco, con lápiz a patear el fiasco. Provocar un social terremoto en este charco.
Del cielo al suelo y del suelo al cielo vamos. Caballito blanco, vuelve pa' tu pueblo. No te tenemos miedo, tenemos vida y fuego. Fuego en nuestras manos, fuego en nuestros ojos. Tenemos tanta vida y esta fuerza color rojo. La niña María no quiere tu castigo. Se va a liberar con el suelo palestino. Somos africanos, latinoamericanos. Somos este sur y juntamos nuestras manos. Todos los callados.
All right, so we're back here with Jackie. So before we left, we were talking about, you know, many of the obstacles, the practical obstacles that trans people are running into. It's not enough to have, you know, policies that are supporting of trans people, but there's also, you know, bigger issues around healthcare, around insurance that are really making this very difficult for people to coexist. And you mentioned the show Transparent. And I remember watching one of the episodes. Did you watch Transparent, the season?
I haven't seen it. I have to find someone who has what is it, Amazon Prime?
Yes, I got you. So I got the hookup.
All right.
So you know, it's not a perfect show. You know, there's always issues. But it's pretty good. But there was this one specific scene where I remember Jeffrey Tambor, I think that's the actor's name, right? Jeffrey Tambor. His character, who's a trans woman in the show, went into a woman's bathroom with her eldest daughter, and her eldest daughter is encouraging her to go into the bathroom, and she really doesn't want to. She's trying to avoid it. And, you know, but her eldest daughter, you know, is you know, from the LA scene. She's kind of like, oh, no, don't worry. No one's going to bother you. And they go into the bathroom, and somebody in the bathroom just said, "That's a man. Why is there a man in here?" And then, they start screaming back and forth, and she's like, "Oh no, he's a pervert. He just wants to be in here because he's a pervert. I'm gonna call the police." And so of course, everyone else in the bathroom was looking at her like she was stupid, but I mean, the level of, embarrassment, the level of ill feeling inside when someone's attacking you like that. Even to have her daughter there supporting her in that scene, it was a very powerful scene for me. So can you talk about, what's the everyday stuff that trans people are running into in sports that kind of brings around these same kind of emotions?
Well, I mean, yeah, there's a climate of fear because trans women get murdered at a disproportionately high rate for, especially trans women of color, compared to the rest of the population. There's also things like just depression and suicidal ideation and suicide itself, where I think 41% of trans people have attempted or succeeded in committing suicide. So there is a lot of mental stress around transitioning. Of course, it's better than living with extreme gender dysphoria for being forced into the closet about it. But, once you're out as trans, there are just everyday obstacles that I think, anyone, athlete or not, has to face. And so I think about that a lot. And I think that's one of the more tangential issues, that's sort of plays into just the daily lives of trans athletes, and worrying about our sisters and brothers out there who are facing this very real struggle. And the bathroom struggle is something that definitely carries over into locker rooms, where, as the ad that I was talking about earlier explains quite clearly that people are afraid of having trans girls in girls' locker rooms, because there's a misconception that trans girls are actually boys.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, there's a lot of everyday stuff, and plus, trans women also experience sexism,
mm-hmm.
And it's sexism plus trans misogyny is kind of like, a double punch. It really puts an extra burden and stress on people who have to live that life, day in and day out.
Do you no, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to ask is there any examples of some really good policies that have been implemented in maybe in sports or in different cities, or different countries for that matter?
Yeah, I think that, interestingly enough, not necessarily talking about sports, but I know that Cuba, for example, has a policy for medical coverage where trans healthcare is completely covered. So that means that whether it's surgery or hormones or whatever, it's all covered. So I think that things like that paved the way for setting the standards that athletes should be abiding by, because then it makes it more accessible and it's not such a huge burden or just series of series of hoops to jump through.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a great example is Cuba in terms of the way that they try to support trans people.
Well, why do you think Cuba? I mean, is there more people? Is there more trans people in Cuba? I mean, why is it that Cuba has better policy?
No, I don't think so. I think that Muriel Castro is the director of Cinesex, which is their sort of sex education and safety and health center, and they are very LGBTQ positive. So they've been making steps away from sort of previous decades of, just discrimination. I think that when the state is able to make those strides in setting the example and using public announcements to support trans people and queer people, I think that paves the way for overturning a lot of the bigotry and discrimination that sexual minorities and also trans people face.
So it's not only, health insurance that's supporting, but it's also, ads and things being put in the community to kind of change the culture. Because there's probably, transphobia still existing in Cuba. I mean, it's not divorced from the rest of the world. So,
no, not at all.
But I think what I always get the sense of is that in Cuba, I mean, if there is, if you are a racist or if you're, homophobic or anything like that, I mean, it's more like society is telling you that that's a bad thing. So you're more in the closet than anything, as the one that has this backward idea. So it's not enough to just have, health insurance policies and good policies within the school, but there has to be a campaign to support these policies, a political education campaign.
Yeah, I think it all needs to happen, at once if we're going to overturn transphobia and trans misogyny and sexism, and patriarchy. Overturning the gender binary so that it's, not just recognize that there is male and female, but that there's a whole spectrum, in fact, of people who might not identify with either gender, or they might identify with both genders, or they might say that they're, somewhere in the middle, or, masculine of center, or feminine of center, or, there are many different transgender identities out there. So I think that, bringing awareness and setting policies is really paving the groundwork for culturally changing, how we view trans people.
So what kind of programs to raise awareness would be positive? Like, what can people be doing in their local communities or at their workplaces or on their sports teams? How can they start, raising awareness on these issues?
Well, I think that just advocating for trans people, whether it's on a day-to-day basis of, a trans person, just being there and supporting them, or if it's making sure that your school has an inclusive policy for bathrooms and sports and all these other things. I think it's, it's fairly straightforward. It's just, it's a lot of work.
Right.
And it's not easy, but I think that it's important to always connect struggles because it gives you the perspective that your struggle is linked to the struggle of trans people, is linked to the struggle of queer people, is linked to the struggle of immigrants. I always like to quote W.O.R.D because she said that there is no such thing as a single-issue struggle because we don't live single-issue lives. Mm-hmm. So whenever you make a stride in one area, you are necessarily also pushing forward in other areas as well. Mm. So, because trans people include immigrants, trans people include people of color who experience racism, and vice versa.
So in the past couple of weeks, we've seen with the non-indictment of Darren Wilson and Daniel Pantaleo and the many other cops before them who have killed people in our communities. You've seen a lot of athletic activism in the past few weeks, especially around the Eric Gardner case, wearing the shirts "I Can't Breathe." We've seen some of the most major athletes on the pro level and now on the college level. I think the Notre Dame women's basketball team, they all wore "I Can't Breathe" shirts either last night or the night prior. What do you think is the significance of connecting this activism with sports?
Well, I think that sports is an area that gives a lot of people, it gives at least me a lot of stability in my life, balancing things out, balancing my physical health with my mental health. And so it's important that, sports are always available to people to participate in, as they should be. And that means that they have to be made inclusive. And like you were saying before about CrossFit, it's not just an issue of CrossFit being transphobic. It's also race issues. It's also, other issues. So all these issues are connected. And so it's important for sports teams to, do what they're doing in terms of showing solidarity, because people of color are in sports and they care about these issues, as should everyone.
Well, some people would argue that they need to just keep playing sports and shut up and stop complicating entertainment. What do you say to that?
Well, I think that there's a huge misconception that sports are divorced from everyday life, and I think that they're not just for entertainment. This is people's livelihoods are based around sports sometimes. And so people care about other issues. No one is so, one-dimensional that they don't, care about other issues. And so if those are the issues that they care about, then they should come out and support, because it's their lives that are at stake too.
Mm-hmm.
Sports doesn't elevate you to a level where you're above facing these issues outside of the field or outside of the court, off the court. So I think it's important to always raise awareness about these different struggles that are going on.
Definitely.
And also just using if you do have that power that you're on the media all the time, to use that,
Definitely.
I think that's the greatest benefit.
Well, I think a lot of athletes get fearful of expressing any kind of political stance because they're worried about endorsements or worried about media backlash. But I think you're right. I think, especially athletes who are coming from oppressed communities, need to understand that they can make a serious contribution, and they have to beat back that fear of being penalized or anything like that, and kind of just stand up for what's right. And so what do you think for the athletes maybe who don't have any awareness on trans people? What are some things that, if someone wants to get more aware, if someone wants to be more sensitive to the issue, what should they be doing?
Honestly, there's the internet. It has a wealth of information. I think that part of it is self-education. Trans people can't expect them to educate everyone about their struggle. But on the other hand, we are here, and we do exist, and we can answer questions. It can just be tiring sometimes. So if you're respectful to trans people, then, you'll look up some stuff yourself, which is easy to answer. And just ask respectful questions. Try to stay away from asking questions about personal history of gender transition. But, most things I think people are open about talking about and sharing their struggle. It's pretty straightforward, and then just calling out transphobia when you see it. I think that's important too. Just educating your peers, educating your coworkers and your family.
Right. I think too that day-to-day battling of bigotry and racism and transphobia, also too is part of the education process, because the minute you have to start defending another, you have to start learning more about their struggle and connecting to their struggle, and finding relationships from your struggle to their struggle. So that is definitely a great way to start that self-education.
Yep.
So before we end, do you have any final points on what we've talked about today? Transphobia or bike polo or anything like that?
No, just I hope things continue to improve in my lifetime. I know that with every movement, there's always a counter movement, and so I hope that we come out victorious. Because it's people's lives at stake. These things matter. They're not just a game. And so hopefully with more awareness and more activism, people being out in the streets, not just after trans women are murdered, but, all the time, raising the issue. I even heard about people going to last night's march for Eric Garner and Mike Brown, holding signs of trans women of color who were murdered by police or law enforcement type. So, it's always important to connect the struggles, I think.
And I've also forgot to mention, I don't know if you're doing it over the winter, but you had a meetup, right, for trans women and women for bike polo. Didn't you have a meetup going on in New York City? So for those who live in New York City, do you still have that going on?
I don't have the Women in Trans Night going on anymore because our court time is limited by when the sun sets.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully when things get warmer and when we have more daylight, I'll kick that back up.
Awesome.
I'm still in the city. And people are always welcoming to new players. All you have to do is come and show up on any Sunday. We do play through the winter, and we play at Christie and Broom here in Chinatown Sunday afternoon. So, come check it out sometime if you want.
Very dope. Is there a website that people can go to find out more information?
I think the best resource that we use online is Facebook, because that's where we post when we're playing, where we're playing, even though it's typically the same spot. But that's where we post all our information. So if you look up NYC Bike Polo on Facebook, you should be able to find us.
So dope. Thank you so much, Jackie.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks again to Jackie for that great interview. Very insightful. A lot of stuff to take from that interview. So please listen to it as many times as you can. Of course, we're going to put in the show notes ways to get in contact with Jackie if you have any follow-up questions. She has a Twitter account and Facebook account that we'll put it into the show notes. And also, for the Bike Polo group in New York City, we'll put in the show notes the link to their Facebook page, so you can get all of that there. Of course, the show notes for this episode are going to be found at revolutionaryfitness.org/035 for episode 35. And of course, tune in next week. Scratch that. Don't tune in next week because next week's the holiday, so we won't have an episode. You can listen to some of the back episodes. We'll be back in January. I think our first show back is January 3rd or something like that. So definitely listen to the back episodes over the next 2 weeks. Enjoy the holidays, whatever you celebrate. Even if you don't celebrate any holidays, enjoy potential days off from work. And of course, New Year's is coming, so we have a lot of big things in store for 2015 coming from Revolutionary Fitness. A lot of new announcements, a lot of cool challenges and things going on in the new year. So stay tuned for all of that. Of course, always stay glued to our website, revolutionaryfitness.org. And you can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/RevFitNYC. And we're also on Instagram and Twitter at the handle RevFitNYC. And of course, my personal website is SeanGarcia.com, and my handle on Instagram and Twitter is at SeanRevFit. Sean SHAWN. So see you in 2 weeks and enjoy the holidays. Peace.